Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you for the nice introduction. It's good to be back. If you've met economists, you know that they love to talk about economics. I'm one of those economists, so it's always a pleasure to talk about the economy and try to educate people on how the economy works. And my particular specialty is money, and that's an interesting topic, I think, for many people, and I like to talk to people about how money works. Now, today I want to talk about the Social Security crisis, which I think is a phony crisis, and I will explain why. And as Tom mentioned, politicians like to say how Social Security is unsustainable, with the tax cut bill that passed. Now the way is being paved for cuts in the so-called entitlements, and even that term I think is very unfortunate. But should we be worried? I think that's a fair question because the society is aging, and that's what I want to explore today. So how does Social Security work? Most of you probably know this, but I wanted to just give a brief overview. The Social Security Administration collects payroll taxes, which employers and employees pay, and then it pays out all the age benefits, so for the elderly who retire, survivors, and also disability insurance. So it's not just a retirement program, it's much broader than that. When it collects more than it pays out, it's running a surplus. That surplus is not locked anywhere in a lockbox, in case somebody is thinking that. It's actually turned over to the government, and the government spends that money on things that it needs to spend on, buying a tank or a drone or chairs and staples, whatever it is that they need. And then in exchange, the Treasury gives the Social Security Trust Fund Treasury securities, which are not marketable, they're just kept there. And when and if, well, it's more like when the Social Security starts running a deficit, then that they can redeem those securities and start using those funds. So that's how it works. Now, unlike other parts of the government, we have sort of separated our retirement spending into a trust fund, right? And we have earmarked particular taxes, the payroll taxes, as if they're paying for this spending. And that's an issue, as I will explain later. Now, the boomers are coming, and that's why everyone is worried, because the baby boomer generation is retiring, and that means there will be more and more people who will be taking out money out of the fund. And because we are an aging society, there will be fewer and fewer people putting money in. So the twin demographic trends of rising life expectancy and lower birth rates is what creates the aging society that we have to deal with. Now, I want to point out that these trends are a good thing, right? We do want people to live longer, and I would say we also don't want very high birth rates, because there is just a limit to how much the planet can support as far as population goes. So the number of Americans 65 and older will be increasing, right? Almost doubling by year 2060. The greater than 65 age group will be about 24% of the population, and currently it's only 15%. And the average life expectancy has increased by more than 10 years, right? From 68 to 79. Good thing. However, we're worried about that, right? Because we think that it can pose a problem. So this is what we call a population pyramid. This is from 1960. You can see that the bottom of the pyramid is wider, right? We have more people who are young, so that's the baby boom generation right there. And then this is what it looks like today, 2017. And this is what it will look like in 2075, right? So we will have fewer and fewer younger people and more older people. That's an aging society, all right? Now, what does that mean? It means that we have fewer workers who will be working and on whose wages payroll taxes will be collected, and there will be more retirees per worker. So as you can see, in 1960s, we had 5.1 workers per Social Security beneficiary, and currently that number is 2.8. And it's projected to decrease even further to 2.2 by 2035 and further, okay? So that has led people to claim that the Social Security is in crisis, right? Fewer people paying in, more people taking money out. And the trustees report that by year 2035, the trust funds will be depleted, right? That doesn't mean there will be no money. It just means that the payroll taxes that we collect will only be sufficient to pay 79% of projected benefits, right? So the remainder is the shortfall. And that shortfall is projected to increase by year 2089 to 73%, okay? All right, so there are proposals for solving the crisis. They can basically be separated into 3 categories: increasing revenues by increasing, say, payroll taxes, decreasing the payouts by lowering the benefits, or privatizing Social Security. So if we privatize, then the surplus wouldn't have to be invested in treasury securities, which pay lower interest rates, but the surplus could be invested in, say, bonds and stocks, right, in the economy, and therefore generating higher returns. Now, I'm going to argue that none of this addresses the issue of provisioning for an aging society, right? So all of this are concerned with the financial side of things, when retirement, the problem of retirement or the problem of providing for an aging society is a problem of real resources. It's not a financial problem. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. So if you have an aging society, what do we have to do? 2 things, right? The first one is, how do we shift the resources to the people who don't work, who retire, right? They don't have wages. So somehow we have to give them access to the economic pie, right? They have to have income to be able to access the pie. That's the financial provisioning side of things. How do we provide retirees and other people who don't work, could be children, right, who don't work or disabled, how do we provide them access to the economic pie? That's one question. The second question, which is the more important question, is whether the economic pie will be large enough to be sufficient for everyone, right? Fewer people working and more people retiring. So fewer people working, can they produce enough for everyone? That's the question, okay? And I think that's the important retirement question, and that's the one that we're not dealing with when we're offering proposals such as cutting the benefits, raising taxes, and so on, okay? Now, the way our pension system currently works is that we have the 3-legged stool, right? We have personal savings, we have private pensions, and then we have Social Security. Now, we can't really count on the private savings and the private pension plans because a lot of Americans have neither. So for a lot of Americans, Social Security is their main retirement income source. All right? So how can we accomplish the shift in the shares of the pie? So the shift away from workers towards the retirees who won't be working. Social Security is not the only way. I mean, before Social Security, what did we do? We did something that probably the retirees today wouldn't want to do, and that's the situation where the elderly live with their children, right? They're working age children who work and support them. How many of the retirees would want to go back to that system? I don't think too many, right? If we want the elderly to live independently, then we have to have either savings, private pensions, right? Which is the 401ks basically, or we have to have public pensions, which is what Social Security is about, right? So in case of private pensions, we put some money aside today, and that accumulates, hopefully, or not, depends on when you retire. I mean, who would want to retire in 2008 or 2009 when the stock market was down? Not a very good time to retire, right? But with the private pensions, we basically sell financial assets that we accumulate to those who are working and are trying to save themselves. And in exchange, we get money which we then use to buy real goods and services, which is what we need, right? Housing, food, and so on when we retire. Now, with the public pensions, the government provides the financial means that allows us, or retirees, access to the economic pie. That's what Social Security is about, okay? Now, can the government afford to do that? We tend to think of payroll taxes as paying for retirement benefits, but that's actually not the right way to think about it. And we tend to use this analogy between the government and a household, saying that the government cannot run perpetual deficits. It has to balance the budget just like households do. No household or firm can run perpetual deficits. At some point, they're going to go bankrupt. The lenders won't lend to them, and so on and so forth. Well, that ignores a very important difference between the federal government and a household or a firm. Households and firms are users of the currency. Where does that currency come from? If you really think about it, it comes from the only issuer of the currency, which is the US government, the federal government, with its central bank, the Federal Reserve, right? So household and firms are currency users, which means they need to have the currency before they can spend. The government is the issuer, and by definition, the issuer of the currency cannot get that currency from anywhere else before they spend it, right? If you're the issuer, you have to issue it first and then collect it back. So think about it. The money that we have to pay our taxes, to buy government bonds, and so on, has to have entered the economy previously. How? Through government spending. That's how money enters the economy. So that means the government has to spend first and tax later, because if the government doesn't spend, there won't be dollars in the economy with which we can pay our taxes. Okay, that's as simple as that. So Uncle Sam can literally never run out of money. Now, notice that I did not say that Uncle Sam should spend unlimited amounts of money, right? That's not one and the same thing. To say that the government is not financially constrained is not the same thing as saying that it should spend unlimited amounts of money. That's not the same thing. So how does the government spend? In the modern economy, where we have computers and all money more or less is electronic these days, that just amounts to changing numbers up and down on a computer. When the government pays us, the numbers in our accounts go up. When we pay taxes, the numbers go down, right? There is no paper money that's being shifted around anymore, no gold coins, right? It's just all electronic. Now, by contrast, if money was made of gold, as it used to be in the past, things would be different, right? The government would have to collect the gold before it could spend. But things are different when money is not made of gold. It's basically fiat money, right? I don't even want to say paper money because it's not paper anymore either. It's just electronic entries. So we like to use the analogy of the stadium. So when there's a game, a football game, and a team scores a goal, then the stadium just adds points, right? It just says, I don't know, 1-0. I know soccer, I don't really know American football very well, but 1-0 or 2-0. Does the stadium need to save points from previous games to be able to award points? The answer is no, right? It's just electronic entries. That's how money works as well. And the government is basically the scorekeeper. This sounds scary, but it's not. It shouldn't be, right? It actually allows us a lot of freedom in terms of the economic possibilities, what we can do, and that's a good thing. So if you don't believe me, here is Alan Greenspan saying basically the same thing, that the United States can pay any debt it has because we can always print money to do that. Like I said, it's not printing money, it's electronic entries. So there is zero probability of default. The US government cannot be forced to default on its liabilities, including its Social Security liabilities. It can choose to do so, but that's a different question, right? Now, again, if money was gold, then you could be forced into default because you couldn't have enough gold, right? So before 1971, the US government promised conversion to gold, right? If you have a certain amount of money, you can get gold in exchange and so on. But we don't do that anymore, and therefore we cannot be forced into default. The US government is not financially constrained. Now, what about taxes? Does that mean that we can just stop collecting taxes? and especially payroll taxes, because they don't pay for Social Security technically? The answer is actually no, and I will explain why. But before I do that, I want to make the point that when we pay our taxes, what the government gets back in exchange is its own IOUs. In my class, when I teach about money, I like to go through this exercise where I tell my students, take a piece of paper and write, I owe you $20 on it, right? Now put that piece of paper in your pocket. Are you any richer than before? And the answer is no, because what you are carrying in your pocket is your own IOU, right? You owe yourself. Now, if you give that IOU to somebody else, they will be better off, right? Because now they have a claim on you for $20. The same happens when the government taxes. The government gets its own IOUs back, not in its pocket, but again, it's in electronic entries, and so money gets destroyed when taxes are paid, as simple as that. And therefore, taxes cannot really finance government spending. Now, if that's the case, does that mean we should get rid of taxes? The answer is no. As far as retirement security goes, what's the function of taxes? Well, taxes prevent workers from buying everything that they have produced. That may sound like a bad thing, but if you think about it, if workers were able to buy everything that they produced, what would be left to those who don't work, such as retirees? Nothing, right? So taxes take away some of the income from workers and allow and create the space for non-workers to spend, right? They allow some of the output that has been produced unavailable to workers so that retirees can buy that output, all right? So that's the function of taxes, or at least one of the functions of taxes. It creates space in the economy for those who don't work to be able to consume, to buy goods and services, okay? So solvency is really not a problem for the US government. Again, this is about the federal government. This does not apply to state and local governments because they don't create their own currency. They are, like firms and households, also currency users, not issuers. So what can we do today about Social Security? And if we're thinking about finances, financially, what can we do today? The answer is nothing, right? And there is nothing we should do today financially as far as retirement security goes. The government can always create money. It doesn't need to save the money, right? It's not gold that it locks in a lockbox so that in year 2034 it can get that gold out of there and start spending. That's not how money works, right? If it's electronic entries, the government really cannot save the money. And the only reason why this makes sense, or at least it seems like the government is saving money, is because we have separated out Social Security and earmarked payroll taxes paying for this particular spending, right? We don't have the same thing for other departments in the government. What taxes pay for the drone that the government buys? There is no special tax, right, that pays for that particular item. But we have done that for Social Security, and that's actually wrong. So when should taxes be raised? Should we raise taxes today because there's going to be a shortfall in Social Security in year 2034? The answer is no. Taxes should be raised when the shift in resources should occur. So in year 2034, right, or 2050, whenever, we raise taxes so that workers can't buy all of the output and therefore retirees can buy some of it. That's when we should raise taxes. No reason to raise taxes today or cut benefits today, preparing for a shift of real resources some point in the future, okay? Now, the important question, as I said at the beginning, is not whether financially we can afford retirement. The question is whether the economic pie will be large enough for all of us, right? The essential problem of an aging society is the real provisioning, real resources, real goods and services. It's not about finances. And as I mentioned, we have fewer and fewer workers working to support more retirees and, you know, children and others who don't work, disabled people and so on. So that's the real burden of retiring, of the retirement, of an aging society. Raising taxes or cutting benefits today will do nothing to increase the size of the economic pie. If you think about it, if anything, it will actually hurt the GDP growth, because if you raise taxes, say payroll taxes, that leaves less take-home pay for workers, which means they will consume less. When workers consume less, firms produce less and invest less. Capitalism runs on sales. When sales decrease, then firms will not be investing. And investment is exactly what we need to be able to produce more in the future. So raising taxes today or cutting benefits, right? The same effect on demand. It's going to depress demand, and therefore it will actually hurt our ability to provide for the future. And one thing that I want to note is that the real burden of providing for an aging society exists whether or not we have Social Security. If we got rid of the Social Security system today, the real burden will still be there, right? We still have to worry about the size of the economic pie. Will it be large enough to satisfy everybody's needs and wants, right? So that problem doesn't go away when we get rid of Social Security, when we privatize it, and so on. And that problem doesn't go away even if the trust fund is in a surplus, right? Even if the trust fund is in a surplus, we have to worry about having enough real stuff some point in the future when fewer and fewer workers will be working and producing. Now, will there be enough? I think the answer is absolutely yes, right? If anything, worker productivity has been increasing, not decreasing, right? So the number of workers is not the whole story, it's only part of it. How productive each worker is the more important part of the equation. And worker productivity has been increasing. Now we have had some stalling in that because of the Great Recession, because firms weren't investing, right, in new technologies, which is what really drives worker productivity. New technologies do. But worker productivity is expected to continue to rise. If anything, we're worried about being too productive, right? Robots are coming, they're taking away our jobs. We won't have, we won't need as many workers in the future. That's another concern. So if anything, we're becoming too productive, not productive enough. So I'm sure the size of the economic pie will be large enough, and that's not something we have to worry too much about. But are there things we can do to make sure that the size of the pie is large enough? And the answer is yes. We can't do anything financially, can't save financially as a nation, but we can increase our ability to produce more. What do we do for that? Well, invest in capital, human capital, physical capital, new machines, better educated workers, healthier workers, and so on, right? So investing in healthcare, education, and research and development, more importantly. And if anything, this requires more, not less, public investment, right? So we do want the government to spend in these areas to make sure that we have enough in the future when when our society ages. So just one last thing that I want to leave you with is how much Social Security has helped with alleviating elderly poverty. It's been instrumental in alleviating poverty of the elderly, but also of children because of the survivor benefits and of the disabled. So if you look at it, the poverty among those aged 65 and older has gone down from about 35% in 1959 to about 10% today, right? And it's been at that 10% for a long time now. Without Social Security, things would look different. So those over 65, 40.5% of them would be in poverty without Social Security. Only 8.8% or close to 10% are in poverty, including Social Security. And it helps also with adults ages 18 to 64, right, because of survivor benefits, and also for children under 18. But mostly it's for the elderly, right, and it alleviates the poverty among them. All right, I'm going to stop right here. If you want to learn more about how money works, there is a book by Randall Wray, not my book, somebody else, my former professor actually. It's called Modern Money Theory, a primer on macroeconomics for sovereign monetary systems, and it explains how money works and how fiscal policy works in a country that has its own currency. I'll stop right here and take any questions that you may have.